Hello YouTube, it's Alk here with Yu-Gi-Oh! Underground coming at you with the promised Archfiend tutorial. So let's get straight into it. We are talking about new Archfiends today, guys, and I'm going to break it down into early game, mid game, and late game. Now, before I start, I'm just going to tell you that, of course, everything I tell you is going to be like more in an ideal situation. Obviously, as your opponent's making plays and you're making plays, you have to be the better player and discern what you can and can't get away with and what plays you can and can't make. So, I will announce that right off the bat and get right into it. So, for the new Archfiend decks early game, the name of the game is Archfiends Heiress. This card, whenever it's sent to the graveyard, you get to search an Archfiend, so you want it to be sent to the graveyard. You want to get your searches, you want to thin your deck, and you want to build your combo for the later stages in the game. So in order to get her to the graveyard, you're going to use all of your consistency cards and everything in your power in order to get her to the grave as soon as possible. You're going to want to do that because you run a lot of different recursion traps that you're going to want to get off that can all turn into additional searches into mid-late game. And so you definitely, having Heiress in grave is just, it lets you play Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, if Heiress doesn't go to grave, you don't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because you can't search your deck, and you can't resolve the combos you want to search. So, whatever you gotta do to make her, some people like Kage to Kage to use with your dead level 4s early game. Some people like Summoner Monk into Armageddonite or Megalaval Chain. Just do that. Obviously, you've got Foolish Burial, which is an excellent way to do this. Opening this is really good. Your tour guides will search it, and they will let you go into I don't know where I put them. Zenmaines and Fortune Tune. Usually Fortune Tune is better because Zenmaines is easy to bounce with stuff like Leedies and Banish and just get around. But number 49 pretty much guarantees you that they're going to be attacking. It pretty much guarantees that you're going to send this to the grave via the effect and get it off. So Fortune Tune's really solid early game. And that is pretty much the early game. Early game is turns 1 and 2. You just want to get Heiress to grave, and that should be your objective and your only objective as far as early game is concerned. Mid game, once we get past turn 2, that's when you and your opponent are pretty set up with your combos and whatnot, so that's when you have to start grinding. So the first thing, the mid game can seem a lot like the early game because you still want to get Heiress to graveyard. If you have more opportunities to dump her to grave or search her out with tour guide or Foolish Burial her, you want to get this search off as much as possible in the mid game because it lets you build your combos for late game. How you do this is you toolbox her using all of those revival cards we talked about earlier and any other way that you have drawn. If you draw multiple ways to get Heiress to grave, you're going to be trying to burn those out early game. You're going to try to burn those out in the mid game and continue to get your searches rolling. But at the same time, you're going to have an opponent who's trying to kill you in the mid game. You're going to have to grind against them. I recommend you use Archfiends Roar, and you use these other recursion trap cards, whatever other recursion trap cards you're running, in order to put Heiress in the way of their attacks, so you don't take damage, and you're getting your search off, and keeping consistent. You can loop Heiress and Archfiends Roar to create a sort of wall once per turn, while loading your graveyard up with Roars, which is an Archfiend card, which works for Lord of Horror's effect. Because in the mid-game, what you're also trying to do is grind your opponent out of resources. Lord of Horror is a great card to do that, even though mid-game he's not he's part of the late-game combos, but in the mid-game you can just normal summon him, use his effect to banish any Archfiend cards, like Archfiend's Roar. Like, I like banishing spells or traps, but you can banish monsters too, depending on the situation. Like, if you have a lot of monsters in grave, go ahead and banish those. To pop a card, and even if you normal summon him and pop one card, like, that's a 1-for-1, and it helps you grind your opponent's resources out. More of the mid game includes using your floaters and your Archfiends Cavalry and your Trans Archfiends once you have monsters banished to keep your opponent like further at bay. Trans Archfiend's really good because he can recycle Battle Fader, so you can really wall up there while you're building your late game combos. And obviously, Cavalry, when backed by your power cards like Dark Hole and Torrential, can net you additional Archfiends from the graveyard, an additional advantage that you can use to grind your opponent while still building up for your late game combo by continuing to use Eris searches. In the mid game, it's also best to really like consider what your win condition is. Your win condition can change in a given game because you play a lot of you can play a lot of different auto win cards, and me and Brett, at least in our builds, have chosen to do so. Like, if you have Skill Drain in your hand, you're not going to flip it turn 1 because you're going to want, well, usually not, because you're usually going to have one of these guys getting your Eris out, so you want your turn 1 effect to get your Eris out, but at the same time, like, after turn 1, you've done that, you can pretty much flip Skill Drain and start to grind with Lord of Horror, who becomes 3,000 beats, wherever I put him. There he is. So, if you have Skill Drain, obviously it's a good card to resolve mid-game because there's not a reason that you want your opponent's effects going off. So you're going to be, like, you're going to have incentive to activate this, and to that I say, like, why not? Don't save this card. Like, once you've passed early game, go ahead and use it. And other cards that you set up mid-game, or just, like, if you can steal the game before getting into the late game, that's great. And the cards that let you do that is Eradicator against certain matchups that play a lot of spells or traps. You can really blow them out with this card because it's a heavy storm, and it also hits their hand in their next 3 draws, which can really cripple them and just seal the game for you because it's just sheer advantage and having all their traps out. And Return from the Different Dimension, because if you have if you start setting up with Lord of Horror, you can get 2 or 3 Archfiends banished. Like, you can flip this in your battle phase and go for a blowout, which is pretty nice. And I guess another one's like Dad. Like, you have to monitor your Darks and Grave for Dad. So if you are playing Dark on Dragon, he's definitely something to consider in the mid game because he'll burn at least 1 or 2 of your opponent's resources or just give you the win. So that's pretty solid. And another mid game card who can kind of be considered, he goes into late game a lot, but your Mass Chameleons, to make those, you can make Black Rose plays with them, you can make any level 8 plays with them, and that's good for grinding mid game. And you would think that that's like, this would be the most powerful play in the deck, but it's really not. Because it's moving into the late game, that's when you start really pushing with your field spell. Now, you can activate this in the mid game if you need to. Like, if the 500 attack is going to make a difference, I'd activate it mid game. And if you're, like, have 2 monsters on the field and one's Fiendish Chain, you can play this and banish the Fiendish Chain monster and get a useful monster and stuff. If you're trying to win a field spell war, like, play this mid game. But if not, like, I try to hold, like, I'm playing 2. If you play 3, it's less important, but I try to hold one of these in reserve in my hand. You can search it pretty readily with Eris, so I try to hold one in my hand for as long as possible because you don't want to activate it until you're using it and pushing for game. Now, how you push for game is you need to establish a board of 2 monsters. And there's 2 ways to do this. My favorite way is, like, once they've run out of resources and you're running out of resources, you just kind of hold back a little bit and they think, like, they've outgrinded you, so they overextend and try to push for game. And then you drop Battle Fader, who's a fiend. But if Battle Fader doesn't work out, you can use any spare revival cards you have left to serve the same role of getting a second fiend on the field. And if you can get a Lord of Horror on the field, like, that's all the better. But, like, what you do is you have the first Fiend, and then once you have that first Fiend on the field, you summon Lord of Horror, and use Lord of Horror's effect. You pop a card, like, just pop anything they have left. Then you play the field spell. Use the field spell to banish your second Fiend to get a second Lord of Horror from deck. This one will be at full power, so you've got 2,000. You've got 2,035, unless you've got the first, like if you use a recursion card to get the first Lord of Horror, then you've got 235s. Use this one to pop a second card, and then you play, like that's 5,000 to 7,000 points of damage. And 2 cards popped, which in the late game, like that's a clean shot for game. Unless you haven't dealt any damage. And the late game is also, like once you have this set up, like this is also like the ideal time to be dropping any falling downs, because you take your opponent's monster and you use them to contribute to your attack for game. You can play falling down in the mid game. What I like to do with it in the mid game is when you summon Mass Chameleon, you special summon an Heiress with it. Play Falling Down, grab your opponent's low-level monster, sync with Chameleon and their monster, and then you have your Heiress up as a floater to continue your searches. But it's definitely more ideal if you can hold on to these until you're making that push for game, because when your opponent doesn't have resources, they can't get rid of your Archfiend cards to make this self-kill. And at the same time, like, in the late game, losing that monster to your opponent is really devastating in the late game, because like that's worse than just losing the monster, because now you have to fight the monster that you've invested in. In a late game, you don't necessarily have the resources to do that. So you're looking to use the field spell and recursion cards or battle faders or any stray fiends you have on the field to get these Lord of Horrors out, to destroy what's left and just clean up house and attack for game. And that is pretty much how an ideal Archfiend game should go. In my opinion, the way I've been playing it, which has been relatively successful, I just updated it again after Des Moines and got a first place at Yeti Gaming, which is the biggest card store in St. Louis, so it was pretty impressive. And we did get some I did get some feature matches out of that, because they made me play all the way till I won first place. So I have me playing Dragon Rulers, which may be of particular interest, and me playing Constellars, which is the worst matchup. So you can feel free to watch that as well, and if you have time and patience, you can watch those matches and kind of try to see what I'm talking about. But of course, like, everything I just said is for an ideal game, and not every game is ideal, so be sure to keep that in mind as you're playing the deck. Like, you can look for these things, but be sure to just remember to use your own discernment when making plays. Like, as you grow as a player, you're going to be able to see, like, more easily what cards need to be used in what situation, and just leave your mind open to using whatever cards you need to use to win the game, like, as you see what your setup is and your opponent's setup is, because all the combos, like, it's very, like, ideal world situation. And if you watch the feature matches and you play the deck yourself, you'll see that ideal situations is not always what comes up. So, I hope you learned something from this tutorial. I'll probably post an updated Archfiend deck, the one that I won Yetis with, because I cleaned up the stuff that I didn't like from my deck coming out of Des Moines, and I felt like that was really just worked well, and that the deck definitely, like, we definitely have progressed, and through playtesting, we are definitely moving the new Archfiend deck forward. So, be anticipating that. Rate, comment, subscribe, and like for Archfiends, because they can beat Tier 1 decks. Destroy dreams. I'm out.